What you're looking at is CCTV footage taken inside the Ely Museum, the main museum of the quaint little English town of Ely, just 14 miles northeast of Cambridge. On Tuesday, May 7th, between midnight and 2 a.m., these two yet-to-be-identified individuals broke into the museum and stole two of the oldest and most valuable items in its collection: the largest golden torque ever discovered in England, and a heavy gold bracelet displayed right next to it, both dating all the way back to the late Bronze Age. Both of these stunning objects were discovered just in the 2010s in the area around Ely in East Cambridgeshire, and they only wound up in the museum because the local community banded together to raise enough money to keep it in there, and now they're seriously at risk of being melted down and lost forever. But this video isn't just going to be about this heist, it's also going to be about several different stories of priceless ancient artifacts from around the world being stolen, seized, and luckily returned to where they ought to be. So let me give you some of the context behind the two artifacts that were just heisted. The bracelet was found in 2011, and the torque was found in a freshly plowed field in 2015, both by metal detectorists, like from the show. There's a bit more info about the torque story though, and it's quite a special find, so let me get into it a bit. As you can see, it's beautifully spiraled and has little trumpet-shaped ends, and it's been called the best torque to be found in England in a century, but I'm not really sure how you'd measure that. But it's definitely one of the largest golden torques ever to be found in both Britain and Europe as a whole. It's 126 centimeters long, which is 4 feet 10 inches, or thereabouts. So if you stretched it out, it'd be as tall as a 6th grader. And it seems more like a belt than a necklace, eh? Which makes sense because it may have actually been worn around the waist instead of the neck. It also weighs a little over 1.5 pounds, or 730 grams, so it's a little bit heavier than the contemporary Corard torque in Belfast, which is one of the heaviest torques ever to be found in Ireland. And those 1.5 pounds are made up of 21 karat gold by modern standards, since it's 87% pure gold and the other 13% is silver. No one really knows why it's so big. Maybe it was worn over really thick clothing or even by some sacrificial animal, but ultimately it wasn't actually buried with a body like you might think, and instead it was probably placed in some important forgotten spot in the landscape as some sort of offering, maybe as a gift to some forgotten god. So I really wonder if there's more just waiting to be found around the field that this was found in. Anyways, it dates to between 1300 and 1100 BC, so when the Bronze Age collapse was happening, and the Urnfield tradition, which I went over in the last part of the Forgotten Civilizations iceberg, was spreading across Europe. That falls under the Pennard period of the British Middle Bronze Age, which is actually characterized by all the experimentation British metalworkers were up to due to contact with metalworkers of the Urnfield tradition, whose nice long swords and shields they adopted. And I've stumbled across two other torques that look almost identical to the one formerly in Ely. There's the Minch torque dating to between 1400 and 1100 BC, which was dredged up from the seafloor in 1991 between the Isles of Lewis and Skye off northern Scotland. It's now in the National Museum of Scotland, which is a miracle given that the fisherman who found it initially thought that it was just an old bed spring and left it in his toolbox for a whole year. A little over 90 of these Middle Bronze Age torques have been discovered in Britain and Ireland, and they seem to be most common in Eastern Ireland, where they were probably originally produced, and in southern England. They even spread to the continent, exemplified by this torque, almost identical to the Ely torque, found in Saint-Leu-de-Esserant, just north of Paris in 1843. It's now in the Cabinet de Médailles in Paris. And in general, this torque is really old for a torque, especially since it predates the Celts. In fact, what have been called the oldest Iron Age, so Celtic, gold torques in Britain date to, at most, 450 BC, and were also found surprisingly recently by metal detectorists, just in 2017. The anonymous metal detectorist who found the torque in 2015 reported it to a finds liaison officer of the UK's Portable Antiquities Scheme, which is the way valuable antiquities found by metal detectorists get documented for posterity in the UK. A coroner then deemed it treasure, giving it protected status as crown property, i.e. government property for all you Yanks, because apparently coroners can do that and determine how dead people die, so I guess that makes sense, I don't know. But luckily for whoever found it, the people who find treasure or have it found on their property are entitled to be compensated with however much it's thought to be worth. An evaluation committee from the British Museum decided that the torque was worth a whopping £220,000 £100,000, or $250,000. Luckily, local museums were given first dibs on it and got the chance to raise enough money to buy it, thanks to donations from the public, grants, trusts, and even another museum, the much larger V&A in London. The Ely Museum was able to acquire it in September of 2017, and the Torque then became the centerpiece of its permanent collection, after it first went on display there a month later in October of 2017. It even became one of the main things they advertised on their website, where it's been dubbed the East Cambridgeshire Gold Torque. But now, all the effort that the people of the little town of Ely put into getting these beautiful pieces of their history on public display is down the drain, and I can totally understand why the museum's chair of trustees said that it's a devastating loss for the people of Ely, because, as she put it, it belongs to the people of Ely. And I can't agree more. The museum's curator, Eli Hughes, even compares the loss to grief for a person that the whole community's lost. The main concern now is that the torque and the bracelet are just going to be melted down, because the thieves obviously can't sell them openly in their current state. They might have been stolen on behalf of some crazy private collector, but probably not, especially because the thieves apparently didn't bother taking this little bit of Bronze Age ring money literally encircled by the torque in its display case, possibly because its label says its core is thought to be of base metal. Plus, they didn't bother taking any of the less dazzling Bronze Age items adjacent to it, like this stone wrist guard, these sword fragments, these axe heads, this flint, and these little bell beaker pottery fragments. The two thieves shown in the CCTV footage are probably the same two people seen riding e-scooters near the museum and a car park adjacent to it right around the time of the crime, and the museum is working with police to try and find whoever these people are, which is probably why the museum was closed from Tuesday the 7th to Friday the 10th when it reopened. It also asks anyone with information about the crime to contact the police, the British police, that is, through their web chat service, quoting Operation Lacunar, whatever that means, or to call 101. Also, apparently information can be reported anonymously to Crime Stoppers at 0800-555-111. So if someone watching this just happens to know anything about these two guys, give those a try. There's a lot more recent news of artifact looting, unfortunately, but this time it's because the culprit's already been apprehended. Just on April 27th, Egypt's Interior Ministry announced that it arrested a man who was keeping a whopping 1,118 looted antiquities in his home in Asyut, a city in Upper Egypt. They included some scarabs, ushabtis, two typical Ta-Sokar Osiris statues, two coffins with actual mummies in them, coins, beads, pottery, and various statue fragments. But for some inexplicable reason, Egypt Independent decided to make the main image of their article on it this weird little piece of tourist kitsch that somehow made it in there. There's also been some looting in Peru lately. On May the 3rd, it was announced that a neat little discovery had been made at a site in the mountains north of Lima, known as Lari, but only after it had been targeted by looters. When archaeologists and municipal officials rushed to check the site out after a concerned citizen had reported looting online, they discovered 10 black and white mold-made pots and plates that the looters had just left behind, I guess. They were produced by the Chonke culture 600 years ago, which makes sense because Lari is in the municipality of Chonke in the valley of Chonke. The Chonke emerged around Peru's central coast around 1000 AD, and they occupied Lari between 1100 and 1450, before they were eventually conquered by the Inca. Unfortunately, the Chonke pottery that the looters had left behind for the archaeologists were found in very fragmentary states, likely due to quote-unquote violent manipulation. And who knows what the looters were actually able to make off with. Peru's Ministry of Culture estimates that upwards of 20,000 artifacts are trafficked out of Peru every year, which is just mind-boggling. And that doesn't just include artifacts, it also includes people. Well, dead people. In the first part of the U-Parts iceberg I'm writing right now, I'm going to hopefully cover Peru's alleged alien mummies. And spoiler alert, they're not aliens. And let's just say that they're heavily involved with Peru's illicit trade in mummies and their parts. For instance, this mummy was found being smuggled in a South American version of a DoorDash delivery bag in the Peruvian city of Puno back in February of 2023. I don't even want to get into this. But Peru is definitely working pretty hard to get back as much of its stolen heritage as possible. Back in the middle of last January, there was a big repatriation ceremony at Lima's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which featured 200 artifacts returned to Peru from various private collections and museums in the US, Belgium, Germany, Spain, and even here in Canada somehow. In total, 840 illegally trafficked artifacts have been repatriated back to Peru in the past 2 years, so I guess what they showed at the celebration is just the cream of the crop. These included beautiful Nazca pottery and textiles, some metal Chimu artifacts, and a bunch of Inca stuff, like Moor pottery, mace heads, instruments, sculptures, and even 2 quipus, which was their unique chord-based form of recording information, sort of like writing. But honestly, my favorite has to be this little Chankay sculpture repatriated from Germany.
And now for something completely different.
What a day. You look lonely. I can fix that.
Apparently it's a type of sculpture called a Cuchimilco. Cuchimilcos represent naked men and women with outstretched arms that might have represented ancestors, acted as fertility figurines, or functioned as offerings, because they're mostly found in tombs. As you can see, they can be way less tiny than the one at the celebration. 154 of the artifacts were willingly returned, while the rest had to be seized by Homeland Security and German cops. Interestingly, at least to me, 2 of these were returned by the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History, which I'm actually planning on visiting next week, so I'll tell you guys if I see some strange empty spaces in their display cases. Much more recently, in late April, part of a statue of Ramses II was repatriated to Egypt from Switzerland. Apparently, it was stolen from his temple at Abydos some 30-odd years ago in the late 80s or early 90s. As you can sort of see, he wears a nice Nemes-Chent combo crown, which he's often shown wearing. You can also probably see that one of his cartouches is preserved just above him, which preserves the end of his given name, Ramses. There are a lot of complete statues like this of him sitting next to various deities because he basically made himself one, in keeping with his personality as the world's biggest megalomaniac. The piece was returned after the authorities had first taken notice of it after it was offered for sale in a London gallery back in 2013. It then meandered around various European countries until it was confiscated in Geneva and taken to the Egyptian embassy in Bern in July of 2023. It's currently in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo to be restored, so it isn't actually currently on display, but I would definitely love to see it in its original setting. I still don't know if it was crudely hacked off the larger statue it was a part of, or if it was just fragmented like that, so it'd be interesting to find out. I was originally going to cover a few more recent stories of ancient Egyptian and even Sudanese artifacts being seized and returned, but as I mentioned, I have to head off to California soon, so I'll just leave it at that. But they are on the script on my Patreon, which I hopefully linked in the description, so feel free to check them out. It also includes all my sources. Anyways, I want to thank my patrons, as always, Dhruv Singhal, Booga420, Bajun, Julia Erickson, Harrison Timperley, Doc Bossman, Kevin Ryan, Ayanami Amamami, Bomb Tombadil, Danny Banani, Rose Klein, James Kirk, Hugh DePayne, Alyssa P., Mark Elliott Cullen, Pajamik Wijbitsky, Miha Nidog, and my new esteemed patrons, Jack Lester, Sage Oziri, and Mithridates. My next video is probably going to feature all the amazing ancient artifacts I plan on seeing in LA, and the one after that should be the first part of the long-awaited Uparts iceberg. See you then.